Good everyone guys, today we have a Should You Talisman episode on the Panzer IV 70V. So for those that may remember the P47 video, this is what we're going to be doing every so often. We're just going to take a vehicle out randomly, or you guys can suggest one, and we'll talk about whether you should talisman it or not. In the description below, if you want to just skip ahead to either the weaponry armor, the drivability, so a test drive of the vehicle, the competition of the vehicle, and if you just want to skip straight ahead to the conclusion, please feel free to do so using the timestamps in the description below. Now, one thing before we begin, this vehicle has only just gone up in BR to 5.7. I'm talking a couple of days, if that. And as a result, this is going to be fairly fresh, as in, like, my opinion on this vehicle. So, hopefully this gives you a good idea of what I think this vehicle is capable of, even at 5.7, because obviously this vehicle used to be 5.3. Without further ado, let's get into the weaponry, armor, and mobility of this vehicle. So starting out with the armor, this is what this thing, and I love this thing, like, with a passion. If there's ever a German vehicle that I need for, like, a challenge or something, chances are you'll find me in this or a Panther A, but given the fact that the Panther A is now got up to 6.0, that's going to be a little bit more of a push, but still doable to some extent. And yeah, it is definitely something that you have to consider. So on the front, we have 80mm of frontal armor, which obviously in this lower part here, it's not too angled, so guns can go through this, but directly behind that is the transmission, so you do kind of have a bit more armor than you might think. Additionally, on some parts, you have additional track armor. This is an unlockable module on the vehicle, and I highly, highly suggest running it. It does add a little bit more weight, as I'll show in the overall statistics of the vehicle, but it really doesn't hamper it too much. The lower glacis is just 50, but again, if someone's shooting here, they're hitting the gearbox, you're fine. Honestly, it's very, very rare you'll die here, unless you get hit by a ISU 152/122 or an IS-2, chances are you're going to be able to block the shot for the most part. I think the American 90 can sometimes go through this on the M36 and stuff like that, but I wouldn't say it's guaranteed, to say the least. Coming up to the upper part here, we have 80mm of frontal armor yet again. This is extremely good, and obviously with the additional track armor, you can definitely take a lot more hits than you might think. Additionally as well, you have what, I can't remember the German technical term for this, but it was pig's head for the translation. So if you actually look at the gun mantlet, it's a bit awkwardly shaped. This is the pig's head gun mantlet. So it actually has two layers of 75mm of armor. There's also a little bit where the breech is as well, but not much. But this is incredibly tough. So people who try to breach you to get an advantage will have to find a pretty good spot to do it. Because like I said, there's very little area that you can actually go for. And if we just use our own gun, for example, you can see there's not a lot of room to maneuver. Like, yeah, you can hit the breech at the right angle, but chances are it's just going to ricochet off. Now, the important thing is, do not overextend the side armor on this vehicle. We'll talk about a bit more why in just a moment. But as you can tell, this thing's got the same frontal armor as a Panther for the most part. Thread of low glass is about 10mm thick less, unless it's a later Panther. But this is pretty good armor on the front. Then, of course, being on a Panzer IV chassis, we come to the side, which is a letdown. And that's why I heavily do not advise angling too much. So your safe angle would be like this. You don't want to angle too much, because like I say, you're presenting your side with a good amount of thickness. Up here is a good amount of thickness as well. You could probably push it to around about here in terms of angling. Just don't do this, because Russian guns will go straight through this. Some more high-powered guns will go straight through this. And, well, if you're up against an IS or an ISU, it's going to go straight for the front anyway. So you got a better thing in mind. But other than that, there isn't really a huge amount that's going to be cracking an angled Panzer IV 70. Obviously, at 5.7, it's a little bit more different now, because it will go into 6.7 matches and meet Heat FS slingers. The Heat FS slingers will go straight through, but your gun is generally higher velocity than them, so you can outsnipe them. That's what you want to do with this thing. Coming around to the rear, it is traditional Panzer IV with just 22mm of rear armor. and this upper part of the casemate, which hardly anyone goes for, is just 30. There's also a little bit of track protecting that, but just bear that in mind as well. The roof is 20mm on both the engine deck and the crew compartment, so it's pretty well protected against most enemy aircraft that you'll come across. Just mainly stuff like the Yak-9Ts and Ks, and other highly armed, I should say, vehicles like that will be able to go through the top, but I wouldn't worry about this too much, because chances are if you're in a good position and you're changing frequently, they're going to have a quite hard time spotting such a small vehicle. Overall, though, the armor doesn't look too bad now, does it? It's pretty strong in terms of its overall armor. Like, yeah, if it meets a Heat FS Slinger or a really powerful gun, it's going to go right through it regardless, but that can be said about any vehicle. The fact is, a lot of the vehicles that you're going to be meeting just simply cannot crack the front of this thing. The American 76 can't do it. The American, shall we say, the American 90 struggles with this. The Russian 85 struggles with this, and it's really strong. That's all I'm going to say. Coming into the X-Ray, obviously covering the mobility in the gun now, we have a 300 horsepower engine, which propels with the additional track armor on, 26.2 ton vehicle to a top speed of 21.6. It used to be about 24, but then they nerfed it. Not bad. It's pretty respectable. If you do take off the add-on armor, however, you take off 0.4 of a ton, give or take. So you do get a little bit better power to weight ratio. I just think it's a bit better to have the extra track on the front and the upper part here. So that's my personal suggestion. Keep this on. You'll thank me later. And, well, it's just nice for the vehicle to have. In terms of the gun, of course, we have the 75mm Pak 42, which is pretty much a Panther's gun. This is an incredible gun for 5.7. There's no sugarcoating it, and you can imagine how this thing was at 5.3 with this sort of armor. And there's a good reason why it's gone to 5.7, is because either I play it or other highly experienced players play it, and, well, it's beastly, to say the least. You've got great penetration, great muzzle velocity, versatile shells. I mean, what more can you ask for? This is a perfect gun. And on a good crew, you have just a tad under 8 seconds reload, which for a gun that can crack most, if not all, heavy tanks it's going to come across, yeah, this is kind of crazy when you think about it. There are obviously some exceptions as to what this gun can crack. It's going to be struggling with the IS-2 1944 with its new variable thickness armor. It's going to be struggling a little bit with jumbos at ranges, but up close and personal with jumbos, it can deal with them. But jumbo players know how to kill this thing. The short answer is they'll just shoot your tracks, but if you're lucky enough to get a shot off before the jumbo player, you can pen them, so give it a go. In terms of shells, we have the main round, which is the Panzer IV 3942. Pretty average explosive filler for it's normal for a German vehicle, but that's besides the point. Compared to a Russian gun, it's just night and day, really, but this really does have a good post-penetration anyway, even though it's only 28.9 grams. This is going to be your main shell. There's no question about it. You really don't need anything else, to be brutally honest. You also have HE, which, given you have a 792, which is somewhat usable, I would still suggest bringing a few of these along. We then have APCR for those even tougher threats, which I would personally bring along at least 5 or 10 of these. This is mainly for the jumbo matchup and the IS-2 1944. This is just to guarantee penetration on like the gun breaches, the gunner location, things like that really. You don't need to use this in every match, but carrying a few can sometimes save your life. And speaking of that 792, it's just over here where the commander sits. You only get 600 rounds, so you don't get a lot. You're not going to use this thing much. It's useful for like spotting targets and things like that, but considering how the 75mm velocity is, you don't need to worry about this. Overall though, you can see just how much of a package this thing was at 5.3, but obviously now it's gone to its original VR, because it used to be 5.7 years ago, and it's gone back to 5.7. Personally, I don't think it's going to change it too much, because the heat slingers could still sneak in at 5.3 matchmaking. So I think this thing's going to still be pretty strong. And of course, with the vehicle's good vertical angle guides, I think this thing will be fine. Anyway, I'm going to take you over to a test drive and you can see how this vehicle handles. I'll see you in a moment. And welcome to the test drive. So now I can show you just how this vehicle functions, and, well, you'll notice straight away mobility is not its highest strong suit, which is understandable. It's not going to be really, really fast. But its turning on the spot is pretty good, and of course, well, we're not going to be shooting at a T-26, but the post-pen is adequate on vehicles like that. But what we really want to know is, can this thing crack a T-34? The short answer is yes. You'll be frequently fighting T-34-85s and things like that. Occasionally you might run into a T-44 like over there. But as you can see, T-34-85s, well, that's a normal T-34, but that's besides the point, is really no issue for this gun. It's an incredibly good gun, and it's really competent in the way it handles. Whilst the gun depression angles are not like your typical German tank destroyer with -8 to 10, only having -7, you can still get yourself in a good position in order to shoot at stuff quite adequately. Now, you do have a smoke grenade launcher, which I didn't mention, but it's not great, as you can see. It's that little plate in the middle of the roof. It's not great, it does help, but, you know, it's not what you'd call adequate, so to speak. So like I said, against stuff like T-44s, your gun is not going to be able to crack the front plate, and you will meet more T-44s. But you can go through the turret front. Of course, the turret front is a little bit finicky on the T-44 sometimes. But as you can see, with a well-placed shot, you can easily take them out, whilst they will struggle to deal with you. And as I said earlier, T-34s are no problem. But the one thing that does let this vehicle down is its mobility. It's not the highest, it's average, but it's kind of below average when you compare it to other German tank destroyers and things like that, other than like the Dicker Max and the Astoria Mill, which are even worse. But it's not bad. I mean, it gets up to its top speed rather quickly, but it's not going to be beating anyone to position anytime soon. And like I said, it stops in a dime, and well, if you're dealing with T-44s, as I said, not really a problem. The penetration is extremely good, and the fact that the gun is so high velocity, you can hit targets quite adequately at a decent range. And if you've got a good crew, you can even use your rangefinder, which I don't use this very often, but that's besides the point. Range your shots in quite adequately. Fair enough, we're not cracking the front of a T-10M, but that's not the point. The point is that this gun is just so high velocity and easy to use. What more could you ask for? You've got decent armor, average mobility, a fantastic gun with versatile shells. What more can I really say? And like I said, with careful angling, like if you angle like this, you can very easily bounce a lot of shots for your BR. Fair enough, against some guns you just can't bounce them, but you don't need to, because chances are they have lower velocity guns in exchange for higher penetration in the case of HFS, and if it's a higher velocity gun, you're smaller, you've got an easier time setting up position. What more can I say? You can pretty much exclusively deal with them. And yes, I know we just don't pen to KV2, but, well, that bit that we just hit was extremely unlucky. But like I said, you can pretty much crack most things at this BR without a trouble. You barely even have to aim with this thing. All I'll say is, consider this. Let's head back to the hangar and we can take a look at the vehicle's competition. See you shortly. And welcome back to the hangar. So, I've rather conveniently, as I mentioned about the Panzer IV 70's BR change, this isn't the only vehicle that's had a BR change. There's actually been a couple of others. Mostly the Tigers and the Panthers. The Panther D hasn't changed. This has stayed at 5.3. It's mostly the Panther A, G, and F that you need to worry about. But typically with this series, if I'm talking about a vehicle in a specific rank, I will talk about vehicles in its rank, just so you can have an idea. So of course, unlike the Americans, which we've obviously covered a lot in this series so far, because obviously we're starting off with the Americans and working our way through, we don't really get to talk about SBAs, because Germany actually has some pretty decent ones. Like, obviously the Ostwind 2 is out of the equation here because it's not rank 3. But all I'll say is this thing is a beast when you unlock the final shell. But in terms of competition for the Panzer IV 70, there is quite a few which can definitely stand up to it. But I personally think I would take this over the rest of the competition myself. But that's just me. This may be subject to your own playstyle. This may be subject to your own opinion, so to speak. But that's just me. So in terms of considerations, there are a couple. So one of my personal favourites is actually the Waffenträger. Now, this has had a bit of a shafting recently. The HE mechanics are really unfriendly to this thing. I have covered this thing in a review like 3-4 years ago, but it's very outdated and, well, yeah. But the light armor in this thing is obviously quite a detriment, but it gets the long 88 Pak 43, which is even better than the gun we've just demonstrated. Yeah, it's not going to still crack a T-44, but that's besides the point. The fact is that this thing is, whilst it is very, very slow, especially stock, I personally enjoy this thing. But I wouldn't recommend it to a new player. There is obviously the argument for the Tiger. Now, I'm personally not a huge Tiger fan, never really have been. I think this thing is just overrated, and it's not that good of a tank, but that's me. That's my personal opinion. This is just a box on tracks. Reminds me of the stuff I'd make in like Terratech or something. Shout out if you've actually played that game. But pretty much the Tiger just reminds me of what I used to have in Terratech. It literally is just a box on wheels / tracks, and it just has either a big gun or a lot of guns. That's literally what it is, and personally, it just doesn't work. Someone who had their massive Terratech mech destroyed by a little car because I couldn't get the guns down to shoot it. Yeah, this is definitely something. Fair enough, in the later models of that box on wheels strategy, I did eventually improve that, but that's besides the point. I'm just not a huge fan of the Tiger, given the amount of angled penetration we have these days, because even if you angle the armor on this thing, it's not that great, I'll be honest. The turret is pretty good, but only in spots, and a lot of people know to just shoot the cupola, especially on the H1. On the E, it's not as prevalent, but obviously you don't have the cupola weak spot. You do have a bit of better turret armor, but that's literally the best thing you get about it. Now, the Tigers did get the Panzergranate round, which trades around 20mm of penetration for extremely high explosive filler. But already trading penetration on a gun that isn't actually the best at its tier, I would say. Like, the Panther's gun is superior. The 88 does obviously have the post pen, but the Panther's gun is pretty good anyway. So, yeah, Tiger's not my suggestion. And yes, I know I have a talisman under Tiger E, that was from years ago. This will be covered in the Should You Talisman series eventually. In terms of other vehicles though, the only real considerations are the Panther D and the VK. The VK has a slightly lower BR, but that does kind of hurt it when it comes to making a lineup, because it's the only 5.0 German vehicle that they have, and it can hurt it, because either you have to bring it down, or bring up other vehicles like the Hetzer to like 5.0, which, sorry to say about the Hetzer, it does not like that. Or you have to bring this up to 5.3, in which case you just play the Panther D anyway, because it's got better armor. Sure, it trades a bit of mobility, but why would you not? Like, yeah, it trades about 9 tons, but the fact is that the Panther D just remotely is better. Yes, you're not a supercar in terms of performance, but the Panther D was no slouch, and you get 80mm of front armor plus the Trollish turret. Sorry to say, but this is personally my favourite suggestion. In terms of another tank destroyer you could maybe consider is the... I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce that. I'm just going to call it the Flak Bus. This is what I've always called it. The Flak Bus is alright, but in a meta where we have a lot of HE slinging and playing CAS, personally no. But like I said, with the SPAAs, the best one to consider is the Wirbelwind. With its 420mm Flak 38 cannons, these are familiar territory to you. You have been playing with these if you've been going down the German AA line. It is a fantastic vehicle. Sure, its penetration against tanks is not great. It used to be around 64. Nowadays it's not, but it can still take out some of the very light stuff, like those annoying French armoured cars. But all I will say is don't expect to be using the Whirlwind as a tank destroyer anymore. Same with the Ostwind. They're just not built for that anymore. They've obviously had a lot of penetration changes. But as an SPA, fear these things. The only other consideration is the Panzer IV. I personally prefer this over the 38T. The 38T's side armor is just far too fragile. You can at least angle the Panzer IV a little bit for its BR. You cannot do that with the 38T. The 38T's side armor is only 20mm thick. But like I said, my personal two would be the Panther D and the Panzer IV to suggest. So that brings us to the conclusion. In conclusion, this thing is an absolute beast, and I'm pretty certain a lot of German players will agree with me that I would personally consider this right on the edge of being one of the best options. Same with the Panther D for a rank 3 premium. Well, premium. Talisman, you know what I mean. The fact is that this is one of my favourite vehicles in the German tech tree, and chances are, if there's a specific destroy stuff with Germans, I will be taking this. I've had multiple 10 kill games in this thing. It is great. Fair enough, German teams suck, but that's besides the point. Without further ado, I'm going to leave you all to it for today. Really hope you enjoyed this. A bit of an extended Should You Talisman episode. Kind of needed it for this vehicle, given its reputation and all that. And obviously with the competition being quite scarce, but pretty in-depth as well. I hope you enjoyed that. Anyway, I'll leave you all to it for today, and I'll see you all on the next one.